The crispine air hit my face the moment I stepped out of my pickup and onto the familiar gravel driveway, the same one I used to race down as a boy chasing fireflies while Grandpa fished off the dock. After 30 years away, my grandfather's old cabin looked a little rough around the edges, but still stood strong against the treeline like a quiet sentinel guarding the lake's edge. I had come here not for nostalgia, but for peace, a badly needed one, after 20 years as a federal contractor bouncing between war zones and classified bunkers. The cabin was mine now, left to me after Grandpa passed, and I planned to make it my permanent retreat from a world I no longer wanted to fight for. The lake shimmered under the morning sun, surrounded by thick forest on 3 sides, and, to the south, a cluster of pristine vacation homes that looked like they'd been imported straight out of catalog. That neighborhood, I'd later learn, was called Oak Hill Shores, a gated HOA community whose presence had grown since my last visit years ago. I paid it little mind at first. I was too busy patching the roof, clearing brush, and settling into the quiet rhythm of chopping wood and drinking coffee by the dock. But my peace didn't last. It started with a knock one morning, sharp, deliberate, and way too early. Standing there on my front porch was a woman in her 50s with a stiff bob haircut, huge sunglasses, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a badge of honor. "You must be the new occupant," she said, without introducing herself. "We need to talk about the rules." I blinked at her. "Rules?" "The HOA guidelines. That red paint on your door violates our aesthetic harmony ordinance. And your wood pile is visible from the road. That's a code violation, too." I chuckled politely and said, "Ma'am, I'm not part of your HOA." "Well, that's debatable," she snapped. "We recently annexed this part of the lake. Your property's now under our jurisdiction. You should have gotten the memo." No memo had come. No notice of annexation. No formal letters. Just this stranger barking demands on my porch. "I don't think that's how it works," I said calmly. "This land's been in my family since before your development was even built. Regardless, you'll need to attend our next meeting. Thursday at 7 at the community lodge. Noncompliance will result in citations and fines." Then she spun on her heels and marched back to her golf cart like she'd delivered a verdict from the Supreme Court. I stood there in disbelief, watching her drive off as if she owned the land she rolled over. The clipboard left a dent on my thoughts. That week, 3 citations were nailed to my front door like something out of a bad Western. One for unapproved dock modifications, another for noise violation due to chainsawing logs, and a third for non-permitted vehicle storage, which I guess meant my 2001 Chevy Silverado parked in my own damn driveway. I called the number at the bottom of the notice, got voicemail, and never received a call back. The next morning, a bright orange sticker was slapped on my truck windshield, warning it would be towed pending compliance. That night, I pulled the sticker off with a razor blade and cracked a beer on the dock, stewing in silence under the stars. The next time she showed up, she brought 2 others with her, a balding man in a pastel polo and another clipboard wielder who looked like she taught 3rd-grade yoga. They didn't ask to come onto my land. They strutted across it. "Mister," the man asked. "Luke. Just Luke." "Luke, I'm Marcus with Oak Hill Shores HOA. We need to bring you into compliance." "I told your friend here." I nodded toward Karen, who stood smug with arms folded. "I'm not part of your HOA." "That's your claim?" Marcus replied. "However, our legal team is working on confirming the annexation and updating tax rolls. Until then," Karen interrupted, "we expect you to follow the guidelines. It's for the betterment of the community." "You're not my community." Karen's lips curled. "This attitude won't get you very far, Luke. We're just trying to raise the standards out here. A shack with peeling paint and a rusted-out truck? Not exactly the lakeside lifestyle Oak Hill Shores represents." That did it. "This shack has more history in its wood than your entire development. My grandfather built it before you were born. And unless you've got a legal document saying otherwise, get the hell off my land." I pointed toward the gravel drive. They left reluctantly, Karen muttering something about litigation. That afternoon, I drove into town and pulled land records at the county office. I expected to find confirmation of my cabin's immunity from HOA overreach, but what I found was much more than that. Decades ago, my grandfather had purchased the entire lake. Not just a slice, not just shoreline, but the whole damned body of water and its submerged property lines. The deed sat right there in black and white, transferred to me automatically upon his death. I owned the lake, every last fish, lily pad, and ripple. But that wasn't the end of it. As I flipped through the pages, I found another parcel tied to the same family trust. This one was a narrow strip of land just south of Oak Hill Shores. The map showed it bordering their main gate and extending to a flat gravel lot marked community parking. My jaw dropped. I own that too. The very land they'd paved over to give their residents lake access. For the first time since this nonsense began, I smiled. I didn't say a word to Karen. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few days quietly surveying the edges of the lake and confirming the legal boundaries. I hired a local attorney, an old friend of my grandfather's, to cross-check everything and confirm the paperwork was airtight. It was. Meanwhile, the HOA continued their campaign of pressure. They sent me a formal letter demanding dock modifications be submitted for approval. They threatened to have my non-standard trash bins removed. Then one morning, I heard a rumble outside and came out to see a tow truck backing into my driveway. I waved him off and told him to get off private property. When he hesitated, I told him I was calling the sheriff. He left quickly after that. I knew I could call their bluff now, but I waited. I wanted to see how far they'd go. On Friday evening, I caught Karen taking pictures of my cabin from the shoreline. She didn't even bother hiding. She stood there snapping away, sipping a sugar-free soda like she was on safari. I raised a hand in greeting. You know, I called. Trespassing's a crime. I'm on community shoreline, she barked. You don't own the lake. That's so. I smiled. Keep telling yourself that. She frowned, her camera freezing halfway to her face. I walked away without another word, and that was when I knew the game was changing. That night, I pulled out a folder of my grandfather's old notes, finding a copy of the lake map he'd drawn himself when he first bought it. The shoreline was full of small scribbles. Base nest here, good mushroom patch, beaver lodge, and at the very edge, by the HOA's gate, he'd written, let him build. They'll thank me someday. Turns out he was right. I had no intention of going to war, but if they wanted to pick a fight, I could win it without ever raising my voice. I'd grown up thinking this cabin was just a weekend getaway, a sentimental place with no real value. But now I realized it was more than that. It was leverage. And Karen had no idea she was about to bark up the wrong damn tree. I waited until Monday morning before I made my first move. The sky was overcast, the lake glassy and still, and the only sound came from loons echoing in the distance. I threw on an old flannel shirt, packed a copy of my deed and survey records, and drove into town. I walked straight into the office of the county recorder, handed over the documents, and requested they reconfirm the boundaries of my inherited properties, both the lake and the lot now being used by the Oak Hill Shores HOA as their private parking area. The county clerk, a wiry man named Joe who had worked there longer than the office walls, skimmed the paperwork, then leaned back and gave a slow whistle. Well, if this ain't gonna start a bonfire. I smirked. I'm just asking for a sign. A sign? Yeah, one to go at the entrance of the parking lot. Something tasteful. Private property. Not for public use without owner's permission. Joe raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. The paperwork was filed. I stopped at a local print shop and ordered a professional-grade aluminum sign. Then I paid a young guy named Carter, a local handyman, to install a sturdy post and dig it deep. By the end of the day, the new sign stood tall at the base of the gravel lot that dozens of HOA residents used daily to access their lakeside docks and trails. I didn't put up a fence. I didn't issue threats. Just a single, clear warning. And within hours, the first ripple hit. That evening, I watched from my dock as Karen and her cohort of clipboard warriors arrived in a huff, parked their golf carts beside the lot, and circled the new sign like it was a cursed artifact. I saw finger-pointing. I saw shouting. I saw someone try to yank the signpost, but Carter had driven that thing 3 feet into hard clay and braced it with concrete. It wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I found a letter crammed into my mailbox, typed on Oak Hill Shores letterhead. It demanded the immediate removal of unauthorized signage and claimed that the parking lot had been continuously maintained and improved by the HOA and was therefore under their assumed jurisdiction. I penned a short reply, stapled a copy of my deed to it, and wrote in big red ink, "This is not a request. This is notice." 2 days later, I installed a second sign on a tree along the public trail that circled part of the lake. Notice: all boats, docks, and lake access subject to private ownership. Contact owner for use agreement. I didn't block access. I didn't restrict anyone yet, but the HOA board was already unraveling. Word spread fast through the neighborhood that the lake guy wasn't bluffing. One by one, residents started driving up to my cabin, awkward smiles and polite questions in hand. An older couple from Lot 12 brought a pie and asked if their dock placement was still okay. A middle-aged man named Eric from Lot 3 asked if I could send him a copy of the lake rules, since it turns out I might need your permission to fish off the back dock. I assured them all I wasn't here to make enemies. I told them their docks could stay for now, but we'd need to talk about fair usage agreements in the near future. Most were respectful. Some even admitted they'd never liked the HOA much anyway. That was the first time I realized Karen's iron grip on the community was more like a paper straw, loud but hollow. But Karen herself wasn't going quietly. On Friday morning, I heard the roar of heavy tires and looked out to see a flatbed truck arriving at the parking lot. On it sat a massive load of gravel and fresh asphalt mix. Workers in reflective vests began unloading equipment like they were prepping for a repaving project. I crossed the lot slowly and asked one of them who ordered the job. "Oak Hill Shores HOA," the foreman said, wiping his hands. Said they're repaving and reinforcing drainage. Should take a day or two. On land they don't own? Huh. I pulled out my laminated copy of the deed and pointed to the lot line. "This gravel belongs to me. Any repaving or grading done here without my approval is trespassing, and I'll call the sheriff if a single shovel hits the dirt." The foreman raised both hands, took a look at the paperwork, then turned back to his crew. "Shut it down, boys." Karen showed up an hour later, her face tight and pale like she'd bitten into a lemon rind. "You are obstructing neighborhood infrastructure," she seethed. "I'm enforcing property rights," I replied. "This isn't your land, Karen. You've been squatting your SUVs on private property. That ends today. We've improved it. That counts for something. So does having a legal deed and tax records. You never even bothered to check before throwing your weight around. This will go to court." "Fine," I said. "But until then, no more repaving. No more signs from your HOA. And any vehicle that parks here without my permission gets towed. My lawyer's on standby." The next week was quiet, too quiet. But behind the scenes, things were shifting. I started receiving emails from Oak Hill residents who wanted to leave the HOA. One family told me Karen had fined them $300 for leaving a kayak visible. Another said she'd threatened to revoke their pool access because they skipped a meeting. I saw an opportunity. With the help of my attorney, I drafted a simple lake access agreement that offered residents affordable yearly licenses to continue using their docks, launch boats, or fish the lake, entirely independent of the HOA. The response was overwhelming. Within a month, half the neighborhood had signed on, happy to ditch Karen's endless fines for a fair, transparent deal. I even offered discounts to anyone who pledged not to support future HOA legal action against me. Karen, meanwhile, was losing control. She attempted to hold an emergency meeting, but half the seats were empty. She sent out a mass email calling me a hostile interloper and urging residents to stand firm against this illegal land grab. Except it wasn't a grab. It was a return to rightful ownership, and people knew it. One morning, I got a knock at the door. It was Marcus, the same pastel polo guy who'd come with Karen weeks ago. But this time, he was alone. "Luke," he said sheepishly, "off the record, would you consider leasing the parking lot to the HOA? I mean, even short-term? We can pay." I leaned against the doorframe and looked him over. "You're not with Karen anymore?" He sighed. "There's talk of removing her as president. Too many complaints. Too much drama. People just want to fish and have barbecues without getting cited for wrong-colored lawn chairs." I chuckled. "I'll think about it." "Thanks." He turned to leave, but I stopped him. Tell Karen the next time she tries to tow my truck or tear up my dock, I'll file an injunction. And I'll win. She won't listen. Then maybe she needs to lose. That night, I wrote a letter and posted it at the HOA bulletin board. Effective immediately, unauthorized vehicles in the parking lot will be towed at owner's expense. Residents seeking lake access must have written permission from the property owner. Use of the lake is a privilege, not a right. I signed it simply, Luke Granger, lake owner. The fallout came fast. Karen tried to remove the notice, but the next morning, I posted a fresh one, this time laminated and zip-tied to the signpost. She called the sheriff, but when they came out and reviewed the documents, they simply nodded and told her it was a civil matter, and I had the paperwork to back it all. She fumed, red-faced, pacing in her driveway like a tiger in a too-small cage. Within the next week, 3 board members resigned. Residents began meeting informally on my property to talk about breaking away from the HOA altogether and forming their own lakeside group. Without fines, without harassment, just neighborly cooperation. I didn't ask to be their leader. I didn't want to run meetings or draft bylaws. But I agreed to host their next get-together on my deck with coolers of beer and grill catfish. No clipboards allowed. By now, Karen's power had all but crumbled. Her emails went unanswered. Her attempts to call emergency votes failed due to lack of quorum. I'd heard from a resident that she was trying to sell her house, but no one wanted to buy a property in a community run by someone known for trying to oust a man from land he owned outright. The irony didn't escape me. All her posturing, all her noise, all her clipboard crusading, undone not by shouting, but by simple truth backed by paper, patience, and a little country resolve. And I wasn't done yet. Because while the lake and lot were mine now, and Karen was losing her grip, I had one more surprise to deliver. A legacy my grandfather left behind that Karen and the rest of Oak Hill Shores had never even dreamed existed. And when I revealed it, it wouldn't just end her campaign against me. It would flip the entire neighborhood's future upside down. A month passed, and things had quieted down in Oak Hill Shores, at least on the surface. Karen was still lurking, though less visibly now, like a dethroned queen clinging to the ruins of her crumbling reign. Most of her supporters had jumped ship, and the rest kept their heads down, hoping to avoid her wrath or mine. But I wasn't done, because there was one last piece of the puzzle Karen didn't know about. Something buried, not just in legal papers or historical records, but in the dirt itself. It started with an old metal box I found under a floorboard in my grandfather's cabin, my cabin now. It was wrapped in wax cloth, sealed with an ancient padlock, and buried beneath the flagstone near the hearth. Inside were yellowing documents, maps drawn by hand, and a leather-bound journal filled with entries from decades ago. My grandfather, it turned out, had been more than a savvy outdoorsman. He'd been a visionary. In the 1970s, when the land around the lake was still wild and unincorporated, he purchased not just the lake bed and the parcel where the parking lot sat, but also a hidden tract of land behind the main road. A 5-acre stretch that curved around the back of the HOA's community center and the private tennis courts. It was dense with trees now, forgotten and unused, but it had one unique feature, a legal easement that provided road access through the HOA's main gate, approved before the subdivision was ever zoned. Which meant, legally, I had the right to develop it, commercially or residentially, as I saw fit. I took those documents to my lawyer. We verified everything with the county. It checked out. My mind started racing. I didn't want to build some strip mall or eyesore, but I knew exactly how to use it. I called a meeting, not through the HOA. I didn't need their permission anymore. I invited every Oak Hill Shores resident who had signed the lake access agreement. I also invited the ones who hadn't, just to make sure they heard it straight from me, not through Karen's poison grapevine. That Saturday, about 70 people gathered on the grassy hill beside the lake. Coolers of lemonade and fried chicken lined the benches. Kids played by the water's edge. It wasn't formal. It wasn't hostile. It was neighborly. And that's when I made my announcement. This community has seen its share of tension lately. I began, standing atop a rock with my boots dusty and my dog asleep at my feet. But I believe that's because it was never built with fairness in mind. It was built on control, on fear, on fines and favoritism. That ends now. I pulled out a copy of the new deed. This document confirms that I own 5 acres behind the community center, land that borders your HOA properties but doesn't belong to them. Starting next spring, I'll be developing that land into a public use space. A boat rental shed, a small cafe, a bait shop, a free-use dock and picnic area, all accessible through your main road, thanks to this easement. I held up the easement records. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One man in the back clapped. Others murmured. Karen, who stood tight-lipped near the back, turned a shade of red not found in nature. This means, I continued, that any resident, HOA or not, can enjoy the lake without fear of fines or retaliation. You'll have options. You won't be under one person's thumb. You'll be neighbors again. The applause came slowly at first, but then louder. Some people cheered. Some hugged. Karen stormed off before I'd even finished speaking. That night, I got 3 more emails from residents asking how to opt out of the HOA. Over the following weeks, the HOA's legal counsel resigned. The board was gutted. Karen tried to call an emergency vote to dissolve the lake access agreements, but it failed spectacularly. Only 5 votes out of over 100 in support. In response, she sent a bitter mass email blaming me for destroying neighborhood order and undermining the standards of our community. I sent no reply. I didn't need to. The truth was visible everywhere now. Neighbors barbecuing together, kids riding bikes down streets that had once been filled with no trespassing signs, people smiling and waving instead of ducking clipboards and citations. The bait shop construction began in April. I hired local workers and paid fair wages. I sourced materials from small-town vendors. The cafe was a modest log structure, warm and welcoming, with wide windows facing the lake and a chalkboard menu that changed with the seasons. Locals started calling it Granger's. The name stuck. On opening day, we gave away lemonade and coffee to everyone. I offered Karen a cup myself, a peace offering. She turned her back and walked away, moving slower than she used to, her shoulders heavier, her clipboard nowhere in sight. I heard a few months later she'd listed her house. Too much bad blood, she said. Couldn't walk the streets without people looking at her sideways. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. But I did breathe easier. Not because she was gone, but because the lake finally felt like what it was meant to be. Shared, peaceful, real. That fall, I walked the lake trail at sunset. The leaves were golden and rust-colored, the water smooth, and laughter drifted from the docks where neighbors fished and played music. I passed the old lot, the one Karen once claimed as hers, and saw a new sign posted beside mine. Welcome. Park at your own risk. Enjoy the lake. Be kind. Someone had added it. Not me. Maybe Marcus. Maybe one of the kids who'd grown up under HOA rules and finally saw freedom for what it was. I smiled. Sometimes, justice isn't a hammer, it's a ripple. You plant the truth, you defend it with quiet resolve, and eventually, it spreads. That lake had been mine in writing from the start. But now, it belonged to everyone who respected it, and respected each other. That was the legacy my grandfather left, and now it was mine to protect, not just with fences or fines, but with something stronger, community. The kind that clipboard queens can't kill, and the kind that no piece of paper can ever fully contain.